Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 13th of November, which is a Tuesday evening. And here we go, we've had legalised pot in Canada now for, let me see, just about 30 days. And here we are, pot deliveries back to normal. This is the government's take on things. Province say backlog of orders are cleared. And what happened was that when the doors opened to online ordering, something like 100,000 orders went through on the first night and completely stripped all of the government supplies out. I have a friend who actually went and ordered some online, and he still has not received his order yet. But interesting enough, here is a spokesman from Aurora, and he says cannabis shortage to last months. Supplies of legal marijuana will remain tight for many months, executives at one of the country's largest cannabis companies said, as growers scramble to produce enough to meet the demand from patients and recreational users. Aurora Cannabis Incorporated Chief Executive Officer Terry Booth said demand from government buyers who control the wholesale market in legal recreational cabinet in most provinces is enough to absorb all of the company's pot production until next summer. The shortfall in product since legalization on October the 17th has closed retail stores in Quebec and other provinces, and some medical users cannot get timely access to strains of cannabis or oils they need. I think the provinces are taking whatever product they can get from whatever producer, said Cam Batley, Chief Corporate Officer at Aurora. Like most producers, Aurora is wrestling with how to allocate its supply between recreational buyers and medical users, Mr. Booth said. We can sell every gram we produce up until June into the adult usage recreational market, he said on a conference call with analysts. We're tempering it. We're meeting our commitments and we have extra supply. We will allow that for sale into the adult usage market. Remember that the medical market and the European market fetch us more dough. Okay, so there's your answer right there. That's why the government is going to be short-handed, is because these producers make a lot more money selling into the medical market and into the European market. So the government is going to be sitting last in line to get its product out to the population, and that is not the way you break the black market. And so the only way that the government can increase its supply is to increase the amount that it pays for that supply, which means costs will go up, and again that will not make it easy to compete with the black market. This is going to be an absolute boondoggle. I'm sure it's going to take at least a year, absolute minimum, to sort itself out. But as I've said before, if you want to destroy a good idea, please just put it in the hands of the government, and that is the end of it, because the government is where ideas go to die and be completely overtaken by bureaucracies and committees and departments and so on and so forth. I'm going to be enjoying how this plays out over the next year, and I'll be bringing you several reports, I'm sure, over that period, to highlight some of the issues that were unexpected consequences of the legalization of marijuana. Okay, so here is an interesting link that was sent to me by a friend of mine, Weapons of Mass Migration by Kelly M. Greenhill. Weapons of Mass Migration, Forced Displacement, Coercion and Foreign Policy. Cornell Studies in Security Affairs. Okay, so there's a couple of reviews here, one from Stephen M. Seidman, Foreign Policy. Weapons of mass migration simply alter the way I viewed the flow of peoples. Countries with lower standards of behaviour can use the threat of forcing their people to leave, which would send a flow of unwanted migrants or refugees to democracies that would then have to deal with them. It is very much an asymmetrical approach for weaker authoritarian regimes to mess with advanced democracies. Is this policy relevant? You betcha, as democracies such as the United States have to figure out how to react to these kinds of threats. It certainly pressured France and Italy in different ways when Gaddafi was threatening to send refugees to Europe. And this one by Political Science Quarterly. A new authoritative look at forced displacements, skillfully linking politics to migrations. This combination moves beyond migration as a single focused topic and connects it to choices within foreign policy. Any students of demography, conflict and politics will be well served by this exploration into the interaction between government control, migration and the willingness of populations to move. So it is interesting that people are writing about using migration as a weapon. And let's just pop over here to who Kelly Greenhill is. She's born in 1970, is an American political scientist, an associate professor at Tufts University, and a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, Belfer Science Center for Science and International Affairs, but right here. She also serves as a consultant for US governmental agencies and non-governmental organizations. And we are certainly seeing mass migration from North Africa into Europe. And this was Gaddafi's plan to basically sink Europe in refugees. He let refugees come into that country, flow through, and then aided them across the Mediterranean, and that's still going on today. So this is definitely the fallout from weapons of mass migration. Very interesting topic in this day and age. And of course we have the caravan coming up from Guatemala to through Mexico now, demanding buses to get them to the American border so that they might enter. So it certainly throws a different twist, you know, when you think of refugees as being these poor people with a desperate plight running away from misery, to the idea that they might actually be just the bad actors being gotten rid of. And you know, Cuba did this to America. I don't know if you remember, but Castro said to America that, oh hey, you want to save our people, you want to help our people, okay, you can take a bunch of them. And he just opened the jails up and let those people loose, and they ended up in Miami, and basically they went into gangs, the underworld, and the crime just went through the roof. And that's a factual story. So we know that this stuff does happen, but it's just interesting that there are actually people who are studying it as a weapon of war. So this is an interesting little story here. Nunavut says there are too many polar bears. Here it is. Too many polar bears. Fancy that. There are too many polar bears in parts of Nunavut, and climate change hasn't affected any of them, says a draft management plan from the territorial government that contradicts much of conventional scientific thinking. The proposed plan, which is to go to the public hearings in Iqaluit on Tuesday, says that the growing bear numbers are increasingly jeopardizing public safety, and it's time Inuit knowledge drove management policy. Inuit believe that there are now so many bears that public safety has become a major concern, says a document, the result of 4 years of study and public consultation. Public safety concerns combined with the effects of polar bears on other species suggests that in many Nunavut communities the polar bear may have exceeded the coexistence threshold. Polar bears killed 2 Inuit last summer. The plan leans heavily on Inuit knowledge, which yields population estimates higher than those suggested by Western science for almost all of the 13 included bear populations. Scientists say only one population of bears is growing. The Inuit say there are 9. Environment Canada says 4 populations are shrinking. Inuit say there are none. The proposed plan downplays one of the scientific community's main concerns. Although there is growing scientific evidence linking the impacts of climate change to reduced body conditions of bears and projections of population declines, no declines have currently been attributed to climate change, it says. Inuit knowledge acknowledges that polar bears are exposed to the effects of climate change, but suggests that they are adaptable. Environment Canada's response says that's not in alignment with scientific evidence. It cites 2 studies suggesting the opposite. Andrew DeRocha, a University of Alberta polar bear expert, is blunter. That's just plain wrong, he said. That's been documented in many places now, not just linked to body conditions, but reproductive rates and survival. So I would ask you to cast your mind back to 1992 and the collapse of the East Coast fishery. And here it is below from Wikipedia. What do we see here? The government ignored local fishermen and marine biologists for faulty science and overfished until it was absolutely at the point of collapse. That was when the government called the moratorium, but not before, because they ignored the fishermen. And now here we have a scientist, a polar bear scientist in a university, contradicting people who live in Iqaluit. They live there, they hunt, they travel these grounds all the time. But oh no, they don't know anything about polar bears and their distribution. But we at the university, we do know. So I think I'd be listening to the Inuit and their knowledge, their local knowledge, and following their decisions. And kudos to the Inuit government for following local knowledge and local practices and ignoring the so-called science, because the science is money driven. Please don't always believe the science. The Arctic is such a huge, huge landmass, and so little of it is mapped or flown over. They really have absolutely no idea what the polar bear count is. They're making an awful lot of assumptions on this account, and to not take in local knowledge is absolutely foolhardy. Okay, so that's it. Last story of the evening. You take care. Please, if you enjoyed this, like and subscribe below. And have a great week, and we'll talk to you very soon. See you now. Bye.